have the fortunate pleasure of introducing Kate Kelly, Esquire, for this meeting. And this is an introduction that is astounding. Kate Kelly is a zealous advocate and passionate activist. She has a JD from the American University, Washington College of Law, the only law school in the world funded by and for women. She graduated cum laude in 2012. She's a vocal women's rights champion in the United States and around the world. In her legal career, she has had various incredible opportunities, including working as an Ella Baker Fellow at the Center for Constitutional Rights, and her many roles included working with, here we go, the Inter-American Court of Human Rights, the United Nations Committee Against Torture in Geneva, Switzerland, Women's Refugee Commission, the RFK Center for Justice and Human Rights, Legal Action Worldwide working on sexual violence legislation in Somalia, the African Commission on Human Rights and People's Rights, Planned Parenthood Association of Utah, Human Rights in the U.S. Project at Columbia Law School, a human rights attorney at Equality Now. She spent the better part of the last 2 years working in the United States House of Representatives, primarily on the Equal Rights Amendment. Kate believes the simple and popular adage that women's rights are human rights, and is committed to the legal advocacy and education for women and other marginalized groups. She is nationally known advocate for the ratification of the Equal Rights Amendment and hosts the podcast of Ordinary Equality. Her book, hold on, I have a prop. Her book, also called Ordinary Equality, is about the history of the women who have shaped the U.S. Constitution. This book is available out in our lobby and will be autographed by said Kate Kelly, and they make beautiful Christmas gifts. And Hanukkah, yeah, all of them. Kwanzaa, everybody. In 2013, this is my favorite fact, and also Jimmy's. In 2013, Kate founded a group called Ordained Women to Advocate for Gender Equality in the Mormon Church. She was then convicted of apostasy by 3 male Mormon leaders and excommunicated from the church in 2014 for speaking out against the institutional oppression of women. But Kate's work for women's equality continues unabated. And Kate is the newly appointed board of directors member for the Alice Paul Institute. Welcome, Kate Kelly. I'm like, oh, let me see here. Hold on, I gotta fix the prop.
Adorable.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. So excited to be here. I didn't pay her to say this, so we do have books, but I'm just thrilled to be here and so excited about the work that you're doing in and have done for many, many years in North Carolina to help people understand that we are still not in the Constitution. And I'm so excited. I was asking what should I talk about last night when I met with some of the board for dinner, and I said, well, what about the history and Polly Murray in North Carolina? And they're like, everyone knows that. We want to know what is up with the executive branch, and we want to know what happened in Nevada. And so that's what I'm going to talk about. And I'll keep it short, and I want to answer questions if people have questions. I talk about the ERA all day, every day, in every possible way. So if you have any questions, let me know. Even as we proceed, and happy to answer them. Really quickly, I just want to talk about Alice Paul. I'm on the board of the Alice Paul Institute. Alice Paul is a very interesting and very complicated character. But one thing that I talk about, so in the book, each chapter is a different woman or queer person who's involved in the story for the Equal Rights Amendment. There are 12 chapters, so I call them my 12 apostles of the ERA. And one of them is Alice Paul. And the thing that I wanted to touch on about Alice Paul is Alice was involved in the final push for the 19th Amendment, getting the 19th Amendment across, the threshold and finally getting the 19th Amendment ratified. When women finally had the constitutional right, although not in effect in many places for many people, they immediately pivoted to the next thing. And the next thing for them was the Equal Rights Amendment. So they introduced the ERA in 1923. We're coming up on the exact 100-year anniversary of the Equal Rights Amendment being introduced. It was unveiled in July 21st, 1923 in Seneca Falls, New York, and that's when the National Party introduced it and unveiled it. And that amendment eventually in 1972 got passed in Congress. And I say that to say that Alice Paul from 1923 to 1972 worked tirelessly on the Equal Rights Amendment. There were decades that were called the doldrums that you probably talked about when you talked to Rebecca DeWolf, because her book covers that period, 1930s, 1940s, 1950s, where nothing was happening on the ERA. But Alice Paul continued and continued to bring it up, continued to be at every meeting, continued to get it introduced in Congress when everyone just thought it was a failed project. And it was when the National Organization for Women, which was co-founded by Polly Murray, North Carolinian of incredible talent and basically a legal savant. Polly Murray came up with the theory that women could be included under the 14th Amendment, which Ruth Bader Ginsburg later litigated. So there's a chapter about Polly in my book too. But they founded the National Organization for Women. Polly was literally there when they wrote on a napkin, we need an NAACP for women. And they started saying like what they wanted now to be with Betty Friedan and all those other folks. So Polly was there from the very beginning. And when they decided to form this organization, to form now, they said like, okay, what's our policy platform going to be like? What are we going to ask for? We're going to have this NAACP for women. What is it going to be? What are we going to ask for? And at the meeting, at one of the first policy meetings that they had, there was, mostly younger, glamorous women like Gloria Steinem and, all these different folks. And there was a row of white-haired ladies, and they were sitting in the front, and everyone was kind of like, who are those ladies? Who are these older women? And it was Alice Paul. Alice Paul physically, literally went to the meeting with the National Organization for Women and brought a lot of other ladies from NWP. And they basically infiltrated that meeting and said, your policy platform needs to be the Equal Rights Amendment. And so they integrated that into this new, young, vibrant movement. And that is how the National Organization for Women took on the ERA. And that is how they got it across the threshold in 1972. I say that to say a lot of times when we're working on the Equal Rights Amendment, it feels like nothing is ever going to happen. Like we're talking about it and talking about it and talking about it. We're talking to people who've never heard about it. We're talking to people who don't think we need it. We're talking, we don't know the moment that's going to come and it's actually going to pick up momentum and it's actually going to happen. But like Alice Paul, we're just there. We're going to every meeting. We're inserting it wherever we can. We're talking about it. We're podcasting about it. We're writing books about it. We're doing everything we can. And we don't know the moment when it is actually going to pick up steam, but we have to be ready. We have to be the ones who are building that infrastructure, getting it inserted into those conversations and trying to bring it up whenever we can. And I say that because as I was talking last night with some folks on the board, it is frustrating. It's frustrating to constantly be bringing up something that seems like such a no-brainer. Like, why would we not want this in the Constitution? But I just really appreciate the work that all of you are doing to constantly bring up those conversations, to keep the ERA on the radar, particularly here in North Carolina. And, we don't know when it's going to happen, but it will. And Susan B. Anthony, problematic Susan B. Anthony, she had a saying which was, failure is impossible. And that was her slogan, that it was going to happen. It was just a matter of time. And so that's how I truly view the Equal Rights Amendment, that it is going to happen. It is a matter of time. We're coming up on exactly 100 years. Crystal Eastman, another person that I feature in the book. She was a suffragist and co-author of the Equal Rights Amendment along with Alice Paul. They both had law degrees. And Crystal Eastman had graduated from NYU, was one of only, I think, 3 women in her class. And they wrote and advocated for the ERA. And in 1920, when they introduced it in 1923, Crystal Eastman said, the Equal Rights Amendment is worth it, even if it takes 10 years. So, you know, she thought, even if this takes us a decade, it's still going to be worth it. So that sentiment remains true, even though it's been 100 years since they introduced it in 1923. It's going to be worth it, even if it takes more than 100 years. And so I say all that, I want to know what people's questions are. I'll talk a little bit about the work in Nevada. So in Nevada, they had just passed an Equal Rights Amendment. It is the most comprehensive and progressive Equal Rights Amendment in the country. So 26 states have had Equal Rights Amendments. Now it's 27. The Nevada ERA covers not only sex, which is what the federal ERA covers. The Nevada ERA is race, color, creed, sex, sexual orientation, gender identity, and expression, age, disability, national ancestry, ancestry and national origin. So, yeah. All of those categories are covered by the Nevada Equal Rights Amendment. As if anyone was watching the election, raise your hand if you're watching the election. And so if you're watching the election, you saw what was happening in Nevada. It was like razor thin. In fact, they lost the governor and they lost the lieutenant governor to Republicans. So it flipped red this election. Cortez Masto won by like razor thin margin. You know, we were all on pins and needles. And in that environment, on that ballot, where they lost the governor to a Republican, the Equal Rights Amendment, the most expansive Equal Rights Amendment in the country, that included gender identity and expression and sexual orientation, passed by 58.5%. So incredible work was done by groups on the ground for years, like ERA-NC Alliance for years, the Nevada Now chapter, Jerry Burton and others who you probably know, worked for years, and Senator Pat Spearman, worked with the House leadership to get that, with the Senate leadership to get that across the finish line. But I say that to say that equality is popular. Republicans voted for the Equal Rights Amendment. It pulled at 60% in Nevada among registered Republicans. It beat not only every candidate on the ballot, it also beat out the other 2 ballot measures. There were 3 ballot measures, and the ERA pulled the highest of any of the ballot measures. So I say that to say that it's encouraging to me to see, this is not conjecture. This is real numbers of real people who supported equality in their state, even when they did not support Democrats. They did not support Democrats, but they supported equality. Equality is popular. It is proven. It is motivator. It gets people to the polls. People were excited. People were going to the polls to vote for the Equal Rights Amendment in Nevada. And the way that they got that on the ballot is it passed twice in the legislature. So I know that you don't have the same feature in North Carolina, but in Nevada, you pass it twice in the legislature, and then it goes to the full state for a vote on the ballot, and then it's done. It's in the Constitution, thank God. And we're done. And so the way that they got it, so as you know, they ratified the ERA in 2017 in Nevada, kind of rekindling this whole hope and project of that, what was possible. But then it didn't happen, on the national level. Their ratification hadn't yet been counted. It hadn't actually made it into the Constitution. And so in 2019, the Nevada legislature, for the first time anywhere in the country, in any state, they got a female majority in the legislature. So they have, to this day, they have a female majority legislature. And that female majority legislature immediately passed a state ERA. because they're like, okay, we ratified it. That's like all we can do on the federal level. Their attorney general is involved in suing the national archivist. Like they're doing everything they can for the federal ERA, but they said, but what we can do is we can get a state ERA. We can get it across the finish line, and it's going to be popular. It's going to be popular across party lines. So they passed it in 2019 in the legislature. They passed it in 2021 in the legislature, and then we took it to the ballot this year. As I went around Nevada, I was working with Vote Equality. We had a ERA monster truck in Nevada. It was very Nevada. And I drove that thing around everywhere. Las Vegas, I was in the Nevada Day Parade in Carson City. We were in a horse parade. We were like everywhere. And everywhere we went, people were very excited about the Equal Rights Amendment, very surprised, as you know. Everyone is always surprised that it's not already in the Constitution. Once we get past that hurdle, they're like, well, we need it. It's a no-brainer. We need it. And that's, we were on pins and needles on election day, but the returns came back even better than we thought. And it passed with flying colors. So I'm very encouraged by what happened in Nevada. New York has passed a state ERA. They passed it one time, actually after the Dobbs decision. They tried to pass it in the regular session. It did not pass. After the Dobbs decision, they called a special session in New York, and they passed this Equal Rights Amendment. So it's passed one time. It has to pass again, and then it will go in 2024. It will go to the full state for a vote. So I think the momentum is building in New York. It's going to be, a huge issue. And if everyone in New York knows about the Equal Rights Amendment, that helps us build momentum for the federal ERA. So all of these different efforts count. All of them build up to the ultimate goal of finalizing the ERA and getting our rights finally solidified in the United States Constitution. So I'm excited to be here. I'm excited to be anywhere where people are talking about the ERA. And does anyone have any questions? Yeah. Awesome. If we use the mic, then the folks online can hear.
So it's not a question, it's kind of a comment. Like Pat Spearman goes to the to the National Now conferences all the time, and she is the absolute best speaker I have ever seen in my life. She is amazing. So yay, Pat
Amen.
Spearman.
I am completely and totally enamored and in love and obsessed with Pat. And the final chapter of my book is about Pat. So I'm very, very committed to this narrative, and I appreciate it. Pat Spearman is a queer Black preacher and talks very eloquently about how the Equal Rights Amendment includes all of her, and that's why she fights for it.
Ms. Kelly, we have a question on the Zoom chart from Stephanie Mendel. If different versions of the ERA are passed in states, in other words, Nevada, how does that impact the overall goal?
Yeah, I mean, actually, so there are 26 states that already have ERAs, and they're very different. And those range from California being the first Equal Rights Amendment. Utah, the state I'm from, has an Equal Rights Amendment from 1896. It was included in the original Constitution when Utah became a state. There's a long backstory behind that, but basically Utah, the territorial governors of Utah practiced polygamy. Polygamy was a very controversial issue nationwide, and in order to prove like, we don't discriminate against women, we deserve statehood, which was a lie, by the way. They stuck in an Equal Rights Amendment into their Constitution, and they also gave women the right to vote. So that ERA from 1896 has been used twice since the Dobbs decision to strike down the abortion ban in Utah. So the only way and the only reason you can get an abortion in Utah today is because they have an Equal Rights Amendment. But that Equal Rights Amendment was from 1896, and they're all very different. So the language of the different Equal Rights Amendment, the one in California primarily pertains to employment discrimination. So they vary widely, and I think that's fine. I think this trajectory of having them more open and inclusive, including things like race, including things like disability. I think that for me, the best selling point is like, you know, look at these incredibly pioneering things that they're passing in all of these different states. so much simpler to pass a federal ERA because it's just one category. And so, yeah, I think it builds momentum. I think it proves to people that equality is popular. I think it shows what is possible. And so I'm very, very excited to see these expanding ERAs. The New York ERA says the categories that are included in Nevada, but it also says pregnancy and pregnancy outcomes. So it explicitly includes abortion in the New York ERA, and I think that's a good thing. Yeah.
Kate.
Yes.
Okay, here we go. So Kate, you talked about the fact that this was supported by both parties.
Yes.
Which we all think is absolutely amazing. But what were some of the key talking points that you all made to get the other party that hasn't supported the ERA to come on board?
Yeah, so Nevada is a very interesting state. A lot of the Republicans are sort of more like libertarian Republicans, like they're really big on freedom. They're really big on like, we don't do the normal thing. And so I think one of the things that attracted Republicans is first just the language of the ballot. Like people, when it's not attached to a party, and ballot initiatives are nonpartisan. So when it's not attached to a party, they actually have to read the words. They don't like, there's no indicator one way or the other, like, how should I vote? You know, it's like, oh, I have to actually read the words and decide if I believe in this thing, this idea, this principle, this amendment. And so it's nonpartisan. And so they had to read it. And when you read it, it makes sense. Like when you read it, it's like, oh, race, color, okay, I don't think anyone should be discriminated. One of the big selling points is age. So age is included in the Nevada ERA. There was also lots of controversy because the opposition really focused on age, and they tried to say it would end statutory rape, or because prostitution is legal in Nevada, they said like, oh, teenagers will be able to work in brothels if we pass the ERA. Not true, obviously. But I think age was the selling point for seniors. There's a lot of seniors in Nevada. So when I would go talk to senior centers, I would talk about age and disability, because age and disability are two factors where seniors are disproportionately impacted. So I talked a lot about that. I talked, I would say the least popular categories of the categories that were listed in the Nevada ERA were probably gender, identity, and expression. Those were the hardest to explain to people, particularly seniors. I went and debated at a senior center in Henderson, Nevada, which is a bit more conservative than the rest of Clark County. There's about 200 seniors, and they were like freaking out. They were like freaking out about gender identity and expression. And they're like, what is gender expression? Like, I don't even get this. Like, what is it? Da, da, da. And so, and I'm debating a self-described high stakes poker player. So that's Nevada. I'm on a stage. I'm a constitutional legal expert. I'm debating a high stakes poker player. And I said, oh, they're like, explain to us what gender expression is. And so I say, well, my partner is a butch lesbian. She's here today. So I said, my partner is a butch lesbian. And it was like silence in the room. And one of the ladies literally goes, ugh! And that's like all you can hear in the room. And I was like, oh, okay, this is going well. But I tried to explain and I tried to appeal to them and say, you have grandchildren, you have Generation Z, you have children and grandchildren who at increasing rates are identifying as different identities. And do you want them to be discriminated against? Should they be discriminated against? Should they experience violence or homelessness or all of these different things because of who they are? And so, to be clear, this got no claps from the audience. But afterwards, I went to the back of the room and I had a little table, and many of the women in the room came up to me afterwards. They didn't want to take a flyer. They didn't want to take a sticker. They just said to me very quietly, we are going to vote for it. Don't worry, it's going to pass. We're going to vote for it. It doesn't matter what any one of these people say in this room. And so because of the communities they lived in, they didn't want to be vocal about their support. And it was a very Republican district. an event, but they individually came up to me and said, I'm going to vote for it. I believe you. Thank you for being here. So you really never know who it's going to appeal to. And when you are able to make those arguments about the next generation, I think you can make some headway. Yeah.
I'm glad to see you in person. I'm so glad you're here.
Thank you.
I just wanted to ask, okay, first off, you keep saying pass. So my preliminary thing is you do agree that the rescissions and the deadline are unconstitutional, correct?
Yeah, of course.
Okay. That's what Michelle Thorne did. And just to say, I have a blog called Equality for Women, Arlene Rocky with the EY, like the movies. So you can just Google it. If you want to read her thing, it's linked several times in there. But my question is this. Nationally, in our national task force that we're trying to get Biden to direct the archivist to publish, because he has an Article 2, Section 3 constitutional duty to take care that the laws are faithfully executed, just for y'all to know this part, the backstory, and that it's there is actually a law that makes it mandatory for the archivist to publish all amendments that are ratified by 3/4 of the states, which happened on January 27th, 2020 by Virginia. And of course, we had another president then who, with Bill Barr, blocked it. So my question is, to get President Biden to actually direct the archivist this fall before everything switches over in the House, what are your top 3 strategies that you think we should use?
Yeah. Thank you for pointing that out. I also usually say to people, like, many people think the Equal Rights Amendment is the 28th Amendment and has been properly ratified. I am one of those people. So to be clear, I am one of those people. I do think the ERA is the 28th Amendment. It needs to be recognized, obviously, and is not enforceable until they acknowledge that it is the 28th Amendment. I have tried everything for this strategy. I worked in the House for 2 years. I personally met with the archivist and the acting archivist, so David Ferriero and Deborah Steedle-Wall, who's the current acting archivist until the next proposed archivist comes in. They said, David Ferriero said, it would be the capstone of my career to certify the Equal Rights Amendment. I wish I could. They just do not see it as their prerogative. The Biden administration, as you know, has made 4 separate statements about the Equal Rights Amendment in the past year. All of those statements said very explicitly and repeatedly that Congress needs to act. That is the position of the administration. I have lots of theories about why. I have met with White House counsel personally. I have given them like absolute best elevator pitch for the Equal Rights Amendment. They said things like, we remain unconvinced. They are very smart attorneys who work for the executive department. And if they wanted to come up with the legal arguments, they would. It's a question of political will. And so,
they were using it for votes and money.
Yeah.
So they were using it for votes and money. So my question is, the midterms are over. So to me, I think the situation should be changed. I mean, they should want to do it. Plus for gay rights.
I mean, I'm with you on the should. I'm definitely with you on the should. They should want to publish it. They should want to put it across the finish line. They don't. That's just how it is. Again, I tried everything I could. Carolyn Maloney tried everything she could. Like, we met with Gender Policy Council. We went with White House counsel. We met with the archivist personally multiple times. It's just, that is not their position. And the reason, hot takes, the reason I think that that's not their position is it's very easy to ignore a very small handful of people who want this to happen. There are like comparatively like 10 feminists who care about this compared to immigration, compared to abortion, compared to all these different issues. And there just isn't. When I talk to Senate offices, recently with Schumer's office, with Cardin's office, with all these different offices, they say we don't get calls about the ERA. When we get calls, it's about gas. It's about immigration. It's about, same-sex marriage. It's about all these different things. We do not get calls about the ERA. And that's true. They don't. And so until they feel like this balance of like a tiny handful of very angry feminists versus, a potential constitutional crisis where the president says the Constitution is one thing and the Supreme Court says the Constitution is another thing, that's what they're facing when they have to decide to make the decision. And on the other scale is like a pretty small handful of people who care. And until that changes, they will not change their position. And so, I'm doing everything I personally can. I have a blog, I have a book, I talk about it all the time. I travel the country. Like, we have to all keep doing that until the moment comes and it tips the scales. But I mean, this is very depressing. I'm sorry. I wish this answer was less depressing, but I just don't think it's going to happen. They're just not going to do it. And they're not going to vote it on in the Senate either. Yeah.
Okay.
Ask me a not depressing question.
Well, which is a shame because I got whispered into my ear a second question, but I'm going to stay on the federal level for just a second and ask that question. The federal court case.
Yeah.
What's your opinion about what's going on, and what would you suggest we do next as a collective effort?
Yeah. So the case that you're talking about is, I think it's still called Illinois versus Ferrio, even though he stepped down because there's not a new official archivist. So Virginia dropped out of the case. So the 3 states that ratified sued the archivist to say just do your job. Virginia dropped out of the case when they turned red. So now it's Illinois and Nevada. And that case is currently pending in the DC circuit. They already had the oral arguments. This is just my personal opinion. I'm not a litigator in the case. I did not, I filed amicus briefs in earlier stages, but this is, again, just my personal opinion is we're going to lose. And the ideal scenario is we lose on standing and not on the substantive issues. In the lower court, we did lose on the substantive issues, which is really, really not ideal. So again, this is you're asking me a depressing question.
My next
just
mine
kidding.
Isn't, though.
Just kidding. So I think we're going to lose in the DC circuit. Then the question becomes, do those parties, Illinois and Nevada, do they appeal? If they appeal, then it has the chance to go to the Supreme Court. If they don't, because they're the losing party, if they don't appeal, then it just stays. They don't. The winning party can then appeal. So that's honestly the best case scenario out of that case right now is that they don't appeal and it doesn't go to the Supreme Court and they just decide on standing. Yeah.
Okay. Well,
and there's nothing regular people can do.
My more positive question is, because I'm short, let me move this. My more positive question then is, in North Carolina, I'm bringing it home for a second. So in North Carolina, we barely held on to our governor's veto power, and that was very important to us in terms of abortion access and kind of holding down the South, because out of all the states so far, we have the largest percentage influx of out-of-state seekers of healthcare, reproductive health care. So in terms of the ERA, where do you think we should go next in North Carolina or the greater South in holding that down, or should we link those two as a potential movement forward?
I mean, ballot questions I'm not from North Carolina, so you all know better than I do what the climate is. But ballot questions on abortion have been very popular in very conservative states, Kentucky, other places. And so, again, this is my personal opinion, but I am always very pro linking the ERA and abortion rights. Because it's true. It just has been the case in other places, in New Mexico, in Connecticut, in Utah, there's a currently pending case in Pennsylvania based on their state ERA that state funding has to be available for abortions, and hopefully they'll win that case. So connecting state equal rights amendments to abortion access is true. I also think it's popular. Because in Nevada, what the opposition tried was to link it to abortion. their whole, if you read the ballot supplement, it's like their whole ballot supplement is this is about abortion and it's going to be used to fund abortion and blah, 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 blah. And I think that made it more popular. I think people were reading it and they were like, what? This is about abortion? Okay. Like, great. And so you'll notice, I noticed as we went throughout, they stopped talking about abortion. The opposition stopped talking about abortion and they started talking about age. They started trying to like give scare tactics on these other categories because they realized abortion is popular. They realized it was making it more popular. They realized people were like, wait, this is our abortion amendment? I'm in, and so that is my personal position. Again, it's hard to like distinguish or separate the two because it's just true that the ERA will protect abortion access, no matter, even if it's just sex, and not all these other categories and not pregnancy and pregnancy outcomes. So it's my strong opinion that the two should be very vocally tied and that North Carolina should propose a state ERA. You can talk about the other categories and like there's, I can send polling about how those terms polled. And I have like lots of opinions about that, which I'll save for, the B sides of this conversation. But I do think you should propose a state ERA and you'd be surprised how popular it will be. Yeah.
So
Nice.
we're only going to take 2 more questions.
Okay.
For the sake of time, but I know everybody is absolutely fascinated. So
Yay. I'll be here afterwards too.
I'll be quick. I'm State Senator Gladys Robinson, and can you hear me? I'm State Senator Gladys Robinson. Now in the Senate, we have a pushing and supporting. You know what we're dealing with, though.
Yes. I'm from Utah, so.
And can't be real sure of the House in terms of sustaining vetoes. But I go back to my most famous equal rights advocate, who is Sojourner Truth, and I hope she's in your book.
Yes.
Because I quote her in terms of her fighting for the rights of white women to vote.
Mm-hmm.
And I say, if that could be done, then we could do this now.
Yep.
So we want to engage all of the women here in North Carolina in terms of seeing what coalition we can bring together. So it's possible to get it done. It's possible to get it done, but we just have to push forward and get all the support. So I just want to say that I have to run out, but we just want to let you know our support.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. And I do know what it's like. I know you don't have a super majority anymore, but you did. And so, yeah, thank you for everything you're doing.
Okay, I'll be very quick. I have asked our general senator for what's happening a couple of years ago, and she said it's a hard thing to do.
Yeah.
My question is, in that stance, we've got to cross party lines. We've got to get Republicans excited about what this is about. How do we do that?
Yeah, I mean, age-old question. Very, very difficult. So I honestly, like, maybe part of the poll is polling. Like, I don't know if you've done a statewide poll. We did a statewide poll in Utah, and the ERA polled at 77% across party affiliation. So, like, general, just people in Utah support the ERA. And that is used a lot to talk to legislators. So maybe it's a question of doing like a poll about the Equal Rights Amendment, particularly among Republican constituents. Again, it depends on the language. So there are like, different things you can talk about, doing different types of language for the state ERA. But I think that's one, is like just proving and showing again and again that it's popular with their constituents. And it will be, honestly, it will be. And then there are like a lot of interesting faith angles that I think are important to talk about. And there is a group that specifically focuses on, it's called, is it Resistance Revival? What's the faith group that works on ERA? Justice Revival, yeah. So there's a group called Justice Revival, and they focus on faith-based arguments in support of the Equal Rights Amendment. And they have like really good resources. They meet with Republicans. They also have Republicans for ERA group. And that's led, the ERA Coalition and others. The Federal ERA Coalition or the National Coalition has a group called Republicans for ERA that's led by former state senator Steve Anderson of Illinois. So he played a really big part in getting it passed in Illinois. So there are actually like groups of people organizing Republicans. And I would say the faith arguments and the like popularity arguments have been the best. Yeah.
Hi, I'm Gina Calias, and I'm Arlene's sister, and I'm an attorney, and I 100% believe that the ERA is the 28th Amendment. I have a statement and a question. My statement is I do believe that it's the 28th Amendment, and I do believe that Biden has a duty to publish this, and that we need to make him understand his duty, and that we do need to tie the ERA to abortion and to women's fundamental rights of bodily autonomy. And I think that we need to aggressively dispel the disinformation of there's no 7-year deadline because it wasn't in the text of the amendment that the 50 states got to vote on and to ratify, and also that it cannot be rescinded by a state. It can only be repealed, like prohibition came in with one and prohibition went out with a separate amendment. My question is, just in the news yesterday was Get Her There, Michelle Obama's group. And let me say one other quick thing. We have had a really hard time with the Women's March group because they have totally ignored the ERA and any connection to abortion. So when you're saying it's not tied, we have to tie it to abortion. And the Women's March has denied that. I have been a speaker, Arlene has been a speaker in North Carolina for that. And this is huge to see women against women, mind-boggling. But my question is this. So yesterday in the news was Get Her There, Michelle Obama's project. We have Melinda Gates, we had Amal Clooney getting international attention and talking about how women are treated not well in other countries. Well, they're not being treated well in America. So how can we get Melinda Gates and Amal Clooney and Meghan Markle to say, hello, we agree with you and we want to help women in America?
Yeah.
Do you have any connections there?
If I did, I would have done that years ago. Yeah, I think the first part of your comment is interesting because as an attorney, I find that attorneys are very ineffective in the ERA movement because we always want to say like, we have the best argument, the deadline, the da-da-da-da-da. That is all true. And again, this is not a lack of good legal arguments. These are brilliant minds. These are brilliant legal minds who are working on this issue. If they wanted to make the legal argument, they could. They don't want to. And so that is the part where we have to focus. It's not the legal arguments. They have the legal arguments. They're some of the most brilliant legal minds in our country. They went to some of the most prestigious law schools. They know the arguments. I've personally given them the arguments. Like they know the arguments. It's not a question of who has the better arguments. We have the better arguments. Is the political will there? That's the question we need to be asking. And we can talk about the legal arguments until we're blue in the face. Until they want to do it, they will be totally oblivious to those arguments or unpersuaded by those arguments is what they said to me. So I think, I don't know how we get this tipping point. Like I try every connection I had, like I'm constantly, but to get, even Meghan Markle was quoted as talking about the ERA and like doing this initiative with the Gloria Steinem and others. And like, I've tried to reach out and there's like nothing, there's no follow-up. This initiative never materialized. Like, I don't know what it is, but it's just not, I find that like, I have like a lot of opinions on this and I know we have to end, but like, I'll talk more about this if anyone is interested, but I feel like we've really, the country has gone through like the TED talkification of everything, where it's like, I have a big idea and it's interesting, but there's no specific political policy ask. So it's like, these women are like, we talk about women's inequality. And it's like, okay, but what's the solution? Like, what's the ask? What's the thing? As an organizer, you always have to have a concrete ask and you have to be able to know if you get it or not. Like, I need to know, this is why we say publish. It's because that's a thing we'll know if it happens. Like, did you sign it or did you not sign it? We'll know. But a lot of these women just talk about things in generalities, and it's like they could talk about that until they're blue in the face. They can get speaking fees. They can seem as though they care, but there's no concrete ask. And the same is true of the Women's March. I went to the Women's March in DC. I don't know what the ask was. I don't think there was one. It was just like, march together. in happiness or whatever. Like, you know what I mean? Like there was no ask. And it made me feel good and I loved being there, but there was no ask. So when I went back and I did the Women's March in Utah, we did it 2 days after the Women's March in DC, and we had the ERA as our number one ask. 10,000 people marched in Utah. It was the largest march in Utah state history. And we said the ERA is our ask. Like we had the concrete ask. And that's, I think, why we need to try to get into every room possible. I wish I was sitting in a room with Melinda Gates because I would be like, hey, have you heard? But I think, we need to do that in every way possible. And we also need to increase popular support because the legal arguments will be there when the actual political will is there to make it happen.